Hello. So River Jones here from School of Celebrancy. It's a very exciting times for us at the moment. Doesn't look like we've got any viewers just yet, but I'm sure that there will be some joining us. Yeah, we're in the midst of very exciting times at the moment. So we're just about to launch our new website, which I think will be going live tomorrow. And with that, the new course, Celebrating Earth, which is aimed at practicing celebrants. So I guess this is a moment where we are moving from our beginnings when we launched our first training courses for celebrants. And I guess they were training courses initially for our order members around the world, members of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And then we've opened them up so that anybody who would like to train as a celebrant and is interested in doing that in our particular context can join us. And the new course is reaching out to the wider celebrant community. So I thought this is a good moment to have a chat with Philip Carr-Gomm, our former chief of the order, really whose inspiration led to the development of the School of Celebrancy and all these courses. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Philip into the stream. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Philip.
Hi there. Good to see
you. We can either do it that way or we can do it that way.
That's probably better, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I wanted to speak with you, Philip, about the relationship between celebrancy and druidry, really, and what are, for people that maybe don't know anything about druidry or haven't thought much about how it relates to celebrancy, maybe you could start us off at the beginning of, when you first had the idea of getting a celebrant
course together. Yeah. Well, I suppose a big step on my path in druidry. Druidry is a spiritual practice that I was introduced to, when I was young and started training with the old chief druid Newen when I was 16. And then a few years after I took on that role, I was asked to perform a funeral. Those of you who've read the Druid Way will know the story in that book, because I asked Lucy's parents if I could talk about it in the book, and they said yes. And I remember when I received the phone call, hearing about how this lovely young girl had died in a car crash and how they wanted me to do the funeral. I remember realizing in my sort of bones, as once I put the phone down, that this is where a spiritual, this is where it becomes really serious. I mean, it sounds obvious, I suppose, but do you know what I mean? It was like, this is so sad and so profound, and so that was when I was a celebrant for the first time at that funeral. And there was something in that experience, and anybody who's been a celebrant will know this, that there's something that feels so right in it, I suppose, that you feel that this is, this is something that you've got some noise coming in your, is that coming through you or?
I haven't got any noise, but I can plug in my headphones if we've got a bit.
No, it's okay. I can hear voices. It's like
background noise.
Background noise. Yes. It's very domestic chaos. Don't worry, it's all right. I just wondered.
Shutting a door and see if that helps.
Yeah, great. I'll carry on talking. Nice to see somebody from Lewis. Simone Riley from Lewis is here. I see from the comments. That's great. So yes, yes, and then what happened really is, of course, working with druidry, it's an initiatic tradition. So you do initiation, so you're aware of rites of passage, because the initiations into the grades are like rites of passage, and what are rites of passage. And so it feels very natural for somebody following the path of druidry to become involved in celebrancy. And then I suppose it was about, I don't know, 10 years ago, something like that, that we held a weekend in Somerset at Earth Spirit, and about 30 members of the order came, and we explored for 3 or 4 days the whole topic of celebrancy, and it was one of the best workshops I've ever been in. It's just the energy there, the enthusiasm, the engagement, the interest was fantastic. And I very deliberate. I remember I was aware that one of the things that many people, I think, will think is that training in celebrancy is like being an amateur, that the real professionals are the priests. Somebody, from the Church of England or a Roman Catholic priest or whatever will be a professional, and that celebrants are the sort of lay amateurs who try and, this, maybe it's just me who thought that, I don't know, maybe, but I think it's possible that it's a sort of lurking sense of inferiority people might have. So I very deliberately invited 2 priests to the weekend. Peter Owen Jones, who many of you will recognize from the television and his programs, and Mark Townsend, who's a druid and a Christian priest as well. And because I wanted them to tell everybody how much training a priest has, which is actually very little. And the extraordinary thing is the training that you do, River, in the School of Celebrancy is far deeper and far more comprehensive than the training that a vicar gets, a C of E priest gets. It's extraordinary, but that's the way it is. But I very much wanted them to come and explain what training they experienced, so that people could see, crikey, that's all they get.
So we have got an echo now, so again with the headphones, and then that will get rid of that, hopefully. Excuse me. Glamorous headphones on now. How's that?
That's better. Yes, that's good.
So, yes, what I wanted to sort of delve into with you really is what would you say? I know you've written a whole book about this, what druids believe, but if you had to sort of sum it up to somebody who's maybe looking for celebrant training, somehow stumbles across, or professional development, stumbles across School of Celebrancy, and then discover, oh, this is part of a druid order. What does that mean? What are the implications there? And what are the core values, I suppose, that underpin the vessel that School of Celebrancy sits within?
Sure, yes, that's a good question, isn't it? I mean, I think druidry is sort of supremely natural, it really takes as its starting point not dogma or scripture, not sort of sacred writings by anyone, but it's almost as if druidry is a kind of exhortation to listen to nature and to observe the seasons, and to kind of tune in to the natural awakenings and sort of elations that you experience by being in nature, and to say, what if this is a core spiritual experience? What if this isn't just an aesthetic sort of response to pretty trees and flowers, but is actually something absolutely essential to me as a human being? And I think that's at the heart of it. So it's very simple. It's about observing the cycles of nature and the life of the tree and what these can teach us and so on. And then if you can imagine, kind of layered onto that are the sort of the stories of the landscape, local myth and folklore, and then about 300 years of sort of written druid teachings around these. But I think it's important to know as well that the courses that the School of Celebrancy offers are, whilst the School of Celebrancy is part of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, that the courses themselves sort of stand alone. You don't have to be a member of the order, do you, to take one of the courses? And you don't have to be a druid.
And yeah, absolutely not. And also that there are within druidry people that with widely differing beliefs. So I've been quite pleasantly surprised, I suppose, that to have a few priests who've done the School of Celebrancy training courses now
Really?
from different Christian denominations. They've all been from the States so far, but yeah,
Right.
we've had at least 4, I think, now.
Fantastic.
And then we've had a few Buddhists as well, so Dharma druids. And I suppose, yes, they, as you say, they are for open to people from all. Yeah, you don't have to be a member, and you don't have to ascribe to any particular beliefs. But I do think there is something different that we're offering, perhaps, than in most other celebrancy trainings out there.
Oh, certainly, I think so. But like druidry itself, it's hard to sometimes define it. It's a particular sort of perspective and approach that's hard to define, perhaps, but centers around, I think, a reverence for nature and sort of spirituality found within nature, something like that.
Yeah, I like Deborah's comment that's coming up in the chat that's saying we need to relearn listening as we are nature.
Yes,
it's an
indeed.
important aspect to live by that knowing. Thank you, Deborah. Your lovely comment. Deborah's just completed both of the courses, actually.
Oh great. That's
and yeah, I think for me, when I did my training, which was with another organisation, it seemed to me, I'm just thinking about you talking about your first experience of being asked to act as a celebrant. I suppose if you are following a spiritual path and you're approaching life, I suppose, with that kind of orientation, then absolutely, when you are entrusted to hold one of these really important moments in people's lives, it feels like an act of spiritual service. And in the training I did, it was almost a thing that that was banned, you know. It was something that we weren't allowed to talk, you know. We weren't allowed to talk about, really, or certainly wasn't encouraged. Not allowed, but it wasn't encouraged to discuss that issue. It was all just, we're there to serve the family. Sorry, Philip.
And a thought that's come to me, which is that you know, one of the things I think that the courses do is they work not only for you to be a celebrant and the skills that you need for that and so on, but also it's changing you as a person. It's working with you as a person, so that you as a celebrant are included. Your own personal and spiritual development is a part of your service. And here's, I think, the really interesting point is that the role of a celebrant, this is just my opinion, see if you agree with this one, the role of the celebrant, like the role of a teacher, is one of getting out of the way. It's paradoxical, because on the one hand you have to be fully present, really present, but also out of the way, because it's not about you, it's not about your ego, it's not about anything to do with you, it's about the family and the deceased and so on, or the people who are getting married, or whatever it is that's going on. And this, you know, I came across this when I trained as a Montessori teacher, you know, and I trained as a psychotherapist already. And that's the whole thing with psychotherapy is you know, it's not about you as a therapist, but you have to be fully present and engaged with the client. And so you need to work on your own development and your own self and all the rest of it. And then, so I trained as a therapist first, then I trained as a Montessori teacher, and I discovered, oh, it's the same thing. You have these tiny little children, 2 to 5, that you're working with, and you're not imposing yourself on them. And in Montessori, you're literally getting out of the way. They have this lovely business of having a sort of little mat, and you sort of each child has his own little territory, the mat, and then you maybe suggest something to them, and then you physically get out of the way, and you watch the magic of the child just engaging with the materials and learning for herself or himself, you know. And I think with the celebrant, it's the same thing. And I don't know to what extent other celebrancy trainings engage with that process. Do you know? Yeah. I don't know.
No, it certainly wasn't something that, you know, was discussed in the training that I did. Yeah, and it certainly is something that I talk about on the courses. Absolutely, this business about getting out of the way, I do very much. Yeah, talk about that. And actually, I recently did a talk for the Association of Independent Celebrants, and I was actually having a talk with them about how to draw on the magic of nature to bring to your ceremonies. And I was just telling the story of when I was asked to do my first ceremony, which was a hand fasting, and the guy who asked me said, yeah, we'd really like you to do our hand fasting, because I've seen a lot of people do these kind of ceremonies, but because I should say, we were in the context of, I was with a women's group that we used to do some full moon ceremonies together, and we were holding an open Beltane gathering, a May Day gathering up on the hillside there. And so it was somebody who'd come along to that, and he said, really like you to do our wedding, because you're not up yourself. And I just repeated this to this room full of celebrants that I met. So I was thinking it's rule number one for celebrants is don't be up yourself.
Yeah. It's not about you.
Yeah. And yet, as you say, the paradoxical thing is that it's really important to take care of yourself and be aware of the space that you're in when you go to hold space for others. And so, yeah, the first homework task that I actually devised for the first of our two two training courses, was to invite people to write their own celebrant's prayer. So how to thinking about how you resource and support yourself to do this work. And it's a sense of for me, it's a sense of feeling that we can be held by something greater than ourselves when we step into that place of holding space.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think there's a huge difference, isn't there? If you feel yourself connected to a spiritual tradition, or as part of a spiritual tradition, or perhaps if you know, one can even say more generally, just being in contact with the world of spirit, or having a sense of spiritual connection, then that's a very, very different place to be coming from than if I don't have any of that, and I just, you know, maybe it's unfair for me to point the finger at, say, humanists, but I would imagine that it's likely that a humanist celebrant probably feels that they are a separate individual, and they're not part, because am I right in saying most humanist? I know we're getting controversial here, but let's go for it. The humanist services I've been at are remarkably dull, because the ones that I've been at, they've actually deliberately stated that they don't believe in an afterlife. They don't believe in any spiritual sort of level of reality. as a sort of as a statement of faith, as it were, at the beginning of a
Yeah.
funeral, which I find utterly strange,
Yeah.
because it's sort of how, you know, it's how can any of us really know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the complete opposite of what I encourage people to do when they're holding space for a ceremony. You know, we talk about how to make sure that every ceremony we conduct is really inclusive and that everybody can be present. Because of course, when you're doing these family occasions, you know, funerals or weddings, welcomings, inevitably, all the people who are gathered together aren't going to be all of the same outlook. It's not like
Beliefs.
when we
Yeah.
have an Obod ceremony and everyone's decided that they're into druidry and we all know that we're doing it on that basis.
Well, that's what I was, sorry to interrupt, but that's what I was running when I was at this humanist funeral, and I was thinking, gosh, how would the people of faith in this room feel, the Catholics and the Christians and the other people, with the celebrant openly stating a creed that was so contrary to their own? Strange.
Yeah. So I think I think that's really important to because it's about connecting people, isn't it, and bringing people together. So and about everybody being really present, and for people to be really present, they need to feel that they can be present on their own terms, and
Sure.
whatever they believe or don't believe.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do say that even when, you know, in the courses people write parts of ceremonies, you know, practice writing ceremonies, it might end up being that they're practicing on a ceremony that they end up delivering for real, or it might be that they're practicing on a kind of imaginary ceremony. But even when they're writing a ceremony that they're doing for members of their own druid or pagan community, you always ask them, well, how would you frame that to make sure that somebody who's completely unfamiliar with this understands
Exactly.
what's going on? And yeah. So we were talking before about, you know, something what druids believe, and I guess there's something about druidry and celebrancy, because one of the things that all druids seem to, you know, probably believe in, if that's the right way of putting it, is that we're all ritualists. We all actually believe that ceremonies are useful and powerful thing. It's part of our sort of toolkit. So yeah, could you speak a little bit about that, about what it means to be a ceremonialist or a
Yes, I think a lot of people who follow druidry will be quite naturally drawn to celebrancy, because, as you say, yes, we have druid rituals, and we also, if you think about it, you're empowered in druidry to do rituals yourself. You don't leave it to the priest to do. You do the rituals, and I think in the bardic grade there are sort of 16 rituals that you learn in that first year of training, and so it's something that comes naturally, and you recognize. I remember Nguyen once saying to me, "Ritual is poetry in the world of acts." And there's something about this, specific acts and gestures. There are the elemental weaving rituals in the bardic grade, which involve really just moving objects from the periphery to the center and around. And part of the beauty in those is in the very simplicity of that, the fact that you're just moving objects, like in a tea ceremony. And yes, and if I think there's a difference between undertaking a ceremony, in other words, being a celebrant, officiating at a wedding or a funeral, say, or naming, if you believe that ritual is powerful and creative and poetic, there's a difference if you do that, as opposed to if you believe that what you're really doing is an act of, how can we put it, remembrance, a memorial, a marking of an event. It's much deeper. If you believe that ritual is magic at its heart,
yeah,
then the things you're saying as a celebrant, the gestures you're making, are going to have more effect. I mean, I know, I visit quite often a monastery in France run by this very obscure little church called the Celtic Orthodox Church, and the monks and nuns and priests in this church are druids as well as Christians, and they perform the Eucharist every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning in a forest church. They perform a Christian mass that comes from an Irish manuscript that's 5th century AD, and they believe in magic, and the result is, all their gestures and the singing and everything, you enter into this most wonderful magical ceremony, and it's just utterly transforming. But you can talk to some Christian priests who say that the Eucharist is just a reenactment. It's a reenactment of the Last Supper for the faithful to sort of gather around and remember what happened. There's that phrase in the Eucharist, something like "do this in memory of me" or something like that. And so it's an act, and that's a totally different point of view, isn't it? Well, it's not. It's a very different point of view from it just being an act of remembrance to being a magical ritual, and I think that applies in celebrancy too.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the comments here again. Deborah saying ceremony is blessing in motion, which I think is a lovely way of putting it.
Oh, that's yes.
Blessing saying it evokes a deeper knowledge in the attendees of a ritual. My experience as a celebrant.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. It's very It's a very different kind of feeling. I suppose it's sort of the difference almost between being a kind of MC at an event, the MC, Master of Ceremonies, like,
yes.
You can go to an event and, you're the person who's, welcoming everybody and speaking and, holding the space. But it's a very, very different feeling, isn't it, than if you are actually conducting a ceremony and you're bringing a different kind of intent to it. Yeah,
you're right. That's exactly it. And again, at the risk of being unfair to the humanists, at the last humanist funeral I was at, it was very much that MC feeling. And what he did there was he told us, it was very polite, because he would say, first I'm going to do this, then we're going to do that, then we're going to do that, then we're going to do that, and then we'll say goodbye. And he, like an MC, from a sort of logistical point of view and a rational point of view, it made sense to tell us that first we were going to hear a few readings, and then we were going to listen to a piece of music, and then we were going to look at some photographs, and then we were going to say goodbye and leave the building. But it was so lacking in inspiration. You could feel the energy almost draining out of the room when he did it, as opposed to when a funeral is conducted by a celebrant who is doing a ceremony, and who maybe even senses that the departed is there, or addresses part of the. I always think in the committal prayer, the one that we use in the order, that beautiful one. Turning to the coffin and actually sort of saying it as if the departed is there, sort of setting off on their journey. It's just so different.
Yeah. And having said this, a lot of the ceremonies that I conduct are for people that describe themselves as humanist.
Yes.
and are very sort of clear in their kind of rationalist, scientific outlook on life. But yeah, in when I do ceremonies for people who have been very clear about that, I'm just thinking of one I did last week. I was talking about that very thing, about how it can feel really natural to speak to somebody who has died. It's something that just feels quite natural to us as human beings, even if we are very clear that that we feel that they're dead and they definitely can't hear us anymore. It
Yes.
still feels our relationship with them is continuing, so it still feels natural to
address them. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think yeah, but there's something about inviting people to be really present, isn't there? And you're inviting them to be present within something that's greater than all of us, and whether that's however you conceive of. But there is just this sense, I think, for us who are druids or ceremonialists or spiritual or whatever, that a ceremony doesn't take it's more than the sum of its parts. It's not just about the people and the
Exactly, and I think that's the point I was making about the humanist one. It was just listing the parts doesn't help, because it's actually more than that. And Katie said here, I've always thought the celebrant is the pipeline between the two worlds, and I think I think that is what's happening when you're you are the walker between the worlds. That is the role of the celebrant in some ways.
Yeah. I like to talk about the conductor. I really love this sense of sorry if anyone who's heard me say this before, but it is something that I really love to think about, that we can think about being a conductor of a ceremony as in the conductor of an orchestra, and you're conducting and bringing in the different parts of the ceremony. But then this is other kind of conductor which is being like a lightning rod, and which comes back to this kind of getting out of the way so that something greater can move through. You're inviting this deep connection amongst everyone present, and yeah, I especially love that really when it's when there's a sense of that with the natural world.
Yes, I in this other training I'm involved with, they talk about being like a flute, like a sort of a bone with a clear flute, so that the music can play, it can come through, and you're just this clear channel, as it were.
Yeah.
Similar idea.
So yeah, I think we've probably said most of the most important things about our approach to ceremony, and what kind of gang people might be getting involved with should they decide to sign up to the School of Celebrancy. And yeah, as I said to you earlier, Philip, I'd like to. Well, I'm just wondering, maybe throw it open for a few moments to see if anyone else has got anything that they're particularly burning to ask in the comments before we bring things to a close. And I forgot to do the thing that I normally do at the beginning, which is to say welcome to everybody as they're joining. So I hope you all just assume that you are welcome. Simone and Marika and Deborah, Thomas, Georgina.
And this stays up as well, doesn't it? It stays up.
It does. It does.
So people who, yes.
Yeah.
Because of course we've changed time by an hour, so some people in other countries aren't aware of that or forget that. So because the time changed.
But yeah, what I was about to say is that we've developed a tradition, because you only have to do something twice for it to be a tradition, of ending these little School of Celebrancy live broadcasts with a little moment of connection for us all.
Hmm.
Would you be happy to lead us in a little closing, Philip?
A little closing something or other.
Just a closing something, just a little moment of connection for us.
Okay. Okay. I was at the weekend. Stephanie and I were at a Samhain festival at the weekend, but it was very, you know, and for those of you who don't know, you know, Samhain is this time of you know, All Saints, All Hallows, Halloween, this time of the recognizing those who've gone before us, departed. And so it's a time of remembering the ancestors and those we love who've passed away. But also the transition between autumn and winter, really. And this, you know, I wanted to mention this because this was an event that was put on by a community organisation that has the most beautiful little centre that's been built in the grounds of a hospital in Halesworth in Suffolk. And it's for people who are bereaved, people who have received terminal diagnoses, anybody who's feeling lonely or upset in the community. And they run this fantastic facility where, you know, people drop in between cakes, they have qigong classes and they have counselling and, you know, a whole range of sort of support services and peer groups and all the rest of it. And a forest schools group who have a piece of woodland nearby. And it was a day's event where everybody in the local community was invited, and woven in amongst, you know, soup and toast and storytelling and exercises like you know, working with leaves, writing things that you want to let go of onto leaves and burning them and so on, was they said, will you come along and do a Samhain ceremony? So that was a challenge for me, because I thought, to what level do I pitch this? You know, how, you know, it's not a full-blown Samhain ceremony as we do in druidry. On the other hand, you want people to really feel something special about it. So I did a kind of adapt. I felt my way into the audience and the participants and how it felt. And then I did a sort of adaptation of what we do at Samhain. And it was just a lovely, lovely day and really beautiful. And it felt important because it's like more and more, and this is where it relates to these courses, River, I think, more and more this kind of stuff that we're working with is becoming more mainstream. You know, there were doctors there and just people from all walks of life, some people who'd never heard of druidry, who'd never heard of paganism, who'd never heard of, but they were open to it all and were really interested. And so one of the ways to end something, which is what I did there as well, is you know, just becoming aware of being, in this case, seated in front of our computers wherever we are in the world. On the one hand, sensing ourselves as separate individual beings sitting here, but also, funnily enough, you know, we're in this little group here where we've been spending the last half hour of our life listening to this conversation or participating in it. And so we're connected in some way, just as the way that trees, even though they seem to be alone standing there on the ground, are actually all intimately connected. I think it's lovely to sense that, to feel that being in connection, and then to put our one hand or both hands to the heart, to feel our hearts, and then just to imagine moving our hands forward. And I can't touch the ground where I am because I'm touching a desk, but just moving my hands forward and imagining I'm touching the earth and feeling a blessing on the land. So a blessing on our lives, a blessing on all life, and a blessing on the land. And then gradually coming back to an awareness of being in front of the computer, and opening our eyes, and being here, And it's a pity we can't see everybody's faces, isn't it? That's the nice thing about Zoom, is we could see Deborah and Georgina and Eva and then Linda and Katie and Desiree. But thank you for inviting me, River.
Oh, thank you very much for coming. I noticed a couple of questions popping up as you were speaking, and I'm not going to answer them now, but I'm just going to say to Deborah, expanding on ceremony and nature being different to that being indoors. I think that's a whole topic in itself that perhaps we'll do a session on. And just Eva's asking a question about the new course, and I would say, Eva, you will find all the information up on the website tomorrow at some point. It will go live, and I'll be posting all over Facebook and social media, and excitedly saying that it's out there. Yes, thank you everyone for joining us, and yeah, have a blessed rest of your evening or day wherever you are, and thank you to those of you who have joined us at other moments in time as well. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye, everybody.